With all the intelligence, Tariq, all the advantages I fucking never had, that's the best you can do, a drug dealer.
If it's okay for you, why ain't it okay for me?
Listen to me, Tariq. When I was your age, I thought it was the right thing to do. My father tried to get me to turn my back on the streets. I didn't listen. I don't want you to make the same mistake, son.
Just like Neo in The Matrix, some characters in power have had a choice. You guys know all about the red pill and the blue pill. In The Matrix, it stands for a choice between two realities. Take the red pill and you're accepting the painful truth and the reality outside the Matrix. You take the blue pill, live a blissful normal life. You go on as normal and stay oblivious to the reality of what really is happening around you. So, in breaking down the toxic legacy of the family and the game, we're going to take a look at the red pill and the blue pill for power, and also how it links back to family. Take the red pill, which we're going to say is the path to self-destruction. A life where you're constantly looking over your shoulder. A life for many that only ends in death or jail. Or, you take the blue pill, a life away from the streets, a legit life, where you can be whoever you want to be, which does come with its different sets of challenges, but doesn't have the same dangers as the drug game.
You're gonna get into that school downtown, you're gonna go to college, and you're gonna become a CEO or some shit.
For a young Kanan, Ghost, and also Tariq, that choice was actually real. They could have actually gone to Stuyvesant, or in Ghost's case, he could have gone to Choate. The same goes for Tariq. Not everybody in the world of power has had that luxury. For Tariq, he definitely had more of a choice than the rest, and a lot of his problems were, in my opinion, self-inflicted. But stepping away from their decisions, for other characters apart from Tariq, I want to pose a different kind of question. Is choice sometimes an illusion? For example, in Squid Games, where they give you the illusion that they're giving you a choice, whether you want to participate in the games or not, but they've also programmed a lot of these players' minds into thinking, if you choose the other path, your life is probably over because of what's waiting for them on the outside. You then start to see greed kick in, power kick in. Now let's take a look at Snowfall. You see deprived areas, communities with poor infrastructure, lack of funding, lack of care, the government funding a war through sales of cocaine to communities to keep them in the positions that they're in, to fight their proxy wars. Again, you have a choice to take the right path like Sissy did with the job that she had, but was that choice just an illusion? Later on, we saw Sissy making her choice because she came to the realization, those around her, the government, those guys at the top, just like in Squid Games, they weren't really there to help them, they were there to suppress them, and in some cases, destroy them and their communities. We also saw how Franklin Saint entered the drug business because he knew the game was rigged, and instead of taking the blue pill, he opted for the red pill.
These are the pawns. They like the soldiers. They move like this, one space forward only.
All right, but if I make it to the end, I'm top dog.
Or just like The Wire, people start to see the game as their way out. But as soon as you take the red pill, whether you're given a choice or not, you've then entered a vicious never-ending cycle. So bringing it back to power and the illusion of choice, a lot of these kids when they were young, they didn't actually choose where they were born, the circumstances they were born into. They didn't choose their parents or their way of life or thinking. When some start to become older and wiser, more aware, they then start to make their own choice based on how they see life and how they want to live.
Huh? What do you want from me, boy? Teach me your motherfucking game, Ghost.
Again, out of everyone, I do feel like Tariq had a choice. But for a lot of others in power, and also as in real life, when you're young, you're basically at the mercy of influences around you, and more often than not, it actually starts with your parents, more so in power. So that's the topic of the rest of this particular breakdown, the toxic legacy of family that runs across the world of power, and the illusion of choice. We're also constantly going to be referring back to Power's version of the blue pill and the red pill, and just like the last couple of breakdowns where we've been looking at the chain of events across the world of power, I'm going to be taking a very similar approach. So stick with this video right through to the very end, because this breakdown will open your eyes to how power is just more than about power, powder, and respect. Now when we often look at power, most of the time we think of drugs, power, betrayal, violence, blood, death, and the relentless climb to the top of the food chain. Whether it's a young Kanan Stark, Ghost when he killed Breeze, all the way to characters like Simon Stern in the real world of business, to even characters like Andre Coleman.
I want to be the biggest goddamn drug dealer in New York City.
However, beneath the core of power, there's also family. Whether you look at the Tejadas in Book 2 Ghost, the Flynns in Power Book 4 Force, the St. Patricks in Power, or the Thomases in Raising Kanan, power is actually a very family-orientated drama, which isn't just centered around the usual drugs, power, and betrayal. Especially when we're talking about Raising Kanan, the core of the show is actually the Thomas family. In Sasha Penn's words, everything else orbits around Rock, Kanan, and the Thomases. Now actually coming off the back of season 4, the last couple of my breakdowns post Breeze's introduction, and also as I'm rewatching OG Power, it made me actually think deeper. how that truth actually extends to the rest of the world of power, where family relationships and ties were either built on lies and manipulation, the illusion of choice like we spoke about before, in the case of Tom Egan's early years, and also something he shares in common with Elisa Marie, neglect and drug abuse, Tommy with Kate and Elisa Marie with Lindsay Proctor. In the case of characters like the Tejadas and the Flynns, with Monet and Walter Flynn, power and control. Across Power, we've seen countless of examples of how these parents don't just raise their kids, but how they forge them into the people they eventually become through experiences and influence. We can even go deeper with the Joe and Lindsay Proctor relationship, how Lindsay Proctor's drug abuse, divorce with Joe Proctor, and the tug of war they had in terms of the custody battle for Elisa Marie. As a young girl, just imagine the psychological damage and emotional scars it would have left at this young age. When you're just coming to terms and understanding the world that you live in, you then start to learn about what your father really did, who he is, what he does for a living, on top of being raised by the mafia. Some parents forcing their kids into becoming hustlers, something we saw in Power Book 2 Ghost.
Don't fucking mix our kid with business, Mo. That shit will not end well.
Lorenzo never wanted to push the red pill on their kids, but Monet did, and continued to do so throughout Power Book 2 Ghost. There are also some who have turned their kids into killers and put guns in their hands, some to kill, others for protection. We know Marvin didn't want this for Jukebox, he said it himself. The only thing he was good for was bad, and he didn't want Duke to go in the same direction. But reluctantly, he's had to accept that Duke is him. It goes back to the beginning where we spoke about how certain kids don't choose their parents, their outlook on life and their environment they grew up in. Look at the environment that Duke's grown up in. She doesn't mess with what the Thomases are into. She's actually tried to forge her own path, be someone different, whether it's with music, the army, or going back to college. But her circumstances, environment, and experiences has chosen her path for her. She genuinely can't catch a break because of her surroundings, her family, and the consequences that come with it. Now what that has now done is passed down a toxic legacy of family that spans across generations, from Rock, Marvin, Duke, Kane and Ghost, all the way down to characters like Tariq St. Patrick, and even D-Mac in Power Book 4 Force. If you want to take it one step further and take a look into the future, just have a look at Tariq's hallucination back in Ghost Season 4. The initial vision that he had with Dinah and their son, that vision was Tariq's life if he took Power's version of the blue pill, a legit life where he most likely became a successful businessman. But then you see his future when he takes the red pill, which in reality he took anyway, where he continues on this path of self-destruction. The scene at Club Truth where the younger version of Tariq shoots his older self. It's a cycle of violence and toxicity within families that we've been accustomed to seeing all the way throughout Power. When Tariq killed Ghost, it was meant to free him, but the hallucination shows that he was becoming just like his father, standing in the same club, wearing the same grey suit, mimicking his exact same moves. This toxic legacy is a chain. His own son then also represents Tariq's legacy, but a new generation at risk of inheriting his past choices. When I now watch this scene back over, you see the mirror of the Matrix with the red pill and the blue pill, Tariq's choice in taking the red pill, and this is where I want to come back to the aspect of choice. In the Matrix, Morpheus offers Neo a choice: take the blue pill and live an ignorant, blissful life like everybody else, or take the red pill and learn the harsh truth. In the Power universe, characters like a young Kanan and Ghost, they were pretty much at similar crossroads. They could have chosen the blue pill, which would have been education or something else, a life away from the street and drug game, but it still comes down to their circumstances, parents, and the environment they grew up in, the influences that they had around them that kept them where they were, circumstances or people that kept holding them back. For example, Ghost said that he couldn't leave Tommy, but what if he actually made the choice where he actually left to go to Choate? It's also why constantly throughout Power there were people like Felipe Lobos telling Ghost Tommy was holding him back. He was telling Ghost cut Tommy loose.
Tommy, he's dead weight. I don't mean any disrespect, but I'm gonna be honest, your attachment to him is holding you back.
I think we can probably argue in that instance Ghost did have a choice when he was younger, but again, when you're young, you're at the mercy of those around you, those that can easily manipulate you and influence you. And in Ghost's case, his mother wasn't around, and his father was also murdered, in my opinion, by Kanan and Breeze, or one or the other. But who was he then influenced by after the death of his pops? He would have been influenced and groomed by Kanan and Breeze, and that's what I mean by circumstances and influences around you at a young age. When Ghost was young, no doubt he was smart, no doubt he could have gone far with his education, if he decided to go down that route, but he was also manipulated by Kanan and Breeze, because they would have also seen what he was capable of, and how he would have been a money-making machine just like Kanan now is to Snaps and Pop. But circling back to the beginning again, as Ghost grew older and wiser, as he became more aware of the world he was living in, and what he wanted for himself, we've all heard what he did to Breeze, and also what he did to Kanan. That's because he wasn't a kid anymore being influenced by those around him. In essence, the student started to outshine his teacher. But it all comes back to the point of how parents are actually the first real influencers, because they're the first real point of contact for their kids, where they shape their emotional core and moral compass. Again, looking at a young Kanan in Raising Kanan Season 1, was choice just an illusion?
Go to that school and get the fuck up out of here.
You could have sent me to live with grandmoms a long time ago. Schools out there safe is good, but you ain't do that. You kept me right here next to you, cause this is all we got.
If Rock really wanted to keep Kanan away from the game, she would have tried harder, or sent Kanan to live with his grandma, or done something to keep him away. The fact is, she didn't. As kids, sometimes it's your environment. You don't know any different until you get old enough to see another path. In my opinion, there's a lot of similarities between Kanan and a young Tariq St. Patrick. I think they both had a choice. Both of them made a lot of mistakes. Both were manipulated and lied to when they were younger. In my opinion, both were old enough to see another path. They were offered an alternative, one at Stuyvesant and one at Choate. Before Kanan, by the time he got here, he looked around and this wasn't the environment that he was used to. This wasn't the environment that he grew up in. This didn't represent his family and what they stood for. The red pill is the only pill he knew because of the circumstances he grew up in. The influences that he had around him like Rock, Marvin, Lou, now Snaps and Pop, and also now Breeze.
I ain't never been good. I wasn't raised that way.
The same also applies to characters like Tommy Egan.
This is my business. It's the only thing I was ever good at.
The red pill is all he knows. He lives and dies by the street. But you also have to look at the circumstances that he grew up in. He didn't just grow up under the influence and guidance of Kanan and Breeze. He grew up in a toxic household, a chain of toxicity. If parents are really your first real influencers, because they're the first point of contact, where they shape their emotional core and moral compass, you can probably argue Tommy never really had that when he was younger from either parent. With that being said, let's talk about this in a bit more detail. His relationship with Kate, but also how he's now trying to break this toxic chain with D-Mac. Now growing up, Tommy's relationship and the early years of neglect is the core of Tommy's toxic legacy in Power. In Power, Kate was introduced as this character who is quite unstable and also selfish, although at times I do think she was right. She warned Tommy about Holly, Lakeisha, and even Tony Teresi, but it was her absence at an early age which is what deprived Tommy of this kind of emotional security that he sometimes needs. Kate's addiction, neglect, and especially the lack of a father figure played a huge role in pushing Tommy down the path of the red pill. Him not having a father figure would have meant he would have went out to seek other role models and influencers, and we know who they were. He leaned more towards Ghost, Kanan, and Breeze. Kanan and Breeze would have filled that void of the missing father figure, and Ghost was that kind of protector.
We lived in a black neighborhood. Call them all kinds of names for being white. James found those boys. Gave them what they had coming to them. They never bothered Tommy again.
He always attached himself to those who gave him a sense of belonging, and without Kate's guidance, because she was always high, because of the lack of a father figure, enter Kanan and Breeze, just like Snaps and Pop did for Kanan. They would have also given him a choice like Morpheus gave Neo, or rather act like they gave him a choice. They would have presented Tommy with a path, acted as mentors, molded Tommy into one of their finest soldiers, and the rest is history. But who does it go back to? Who influences you first when you're young? It's your parents, and because there was a lack of presence from both, he chose the red pill, he chose the drug game, maybe not out of ambition during his early years, but more out of necessity because he could barely survive. Now for Tommy, did he have much of a choice? Was he ever offered the chance of a blue pill? Maybe. Only time will tell when we watch Power Origins. But Kate's neglect, the lack of a father figure made the streets home, and it goes back to how some don't really have a choice. And I do think Tommy did fall into that category, which is why he constantly says it's all he's ever known. He'll always say he'll come back to the streets. One day he may have that romantic getaway weekend in Barcelona with Maria, but because the streets is all he's ever known, he'll always come back. However, having said that, in Force, Tommy is actually trying to change this toxic legacy, the cycle that we spoke about before. He wants to change this for his other nephew in D-Mac. He's trying to break this toxic chain. He even compared him to another kid that he knew when he was a similar age, where he was actually referring to Ghost. He sent him to Great Shores Youth Academy to try and protect him, but we all know how not only stubborn D-Mac is, but the pull of the red pill. Even for D-Mac, it stems from a young age with JP not being in his life, him growing up in the streets. Tommy's trying to rewrite and change this toxic legacy of families in Power and push him down the path of the blue pill, which Ghost tried to do with Tariq. Whether he succeeds or not, that's a different question. Judging by what we've already seen in the early teasers for Force Season 3, highly unlikely. So, can this chain of toxicity be broken, or are we just in a constant vicious cycle and a loop in Power? Or will we one day see someone be able to break free and finally change the game? Maybe even Tommy. Who knows what Gary Lennon has in store for his end? I hope it's something different compared to the usual, especially with one of Power's all-time greats. But with that being said, drop all your thoughts down below in the comment section, and as always, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.